what do you make of China's seemingly sudden crackdown on its own tech giants that it worked for so many years to build up and protect?
I mean, the big phenomenon here is all of a sudden we start to see Chinese regulator begins to clamp down all these tech giants. Historically, people seen them as national champion. They pioneer new business model. They have great technologies, is really pride of the country. What we're seeing now is regulator wakes up all of a sudden and discover these tech giants are becoming so big. They are creating this systemic risk to the financial sector or to the industry environment in general, that they begins to put up regulation, trying to rein in the power. And just like anything in China, the development in terms of speed and magnitude is enormous. And we're seeing this wave of regulation coming in now.
So how does the Chinese government then walk this tightrope or manage this balancing act whereby they're cracking down on their own companies but wanting to show and tell the world that China is still a good place to do business?
This is really fascinating, right? Because in a way, China is facing this transition from the sort of traditional manufacturing economy into much more of a knowledge-based R&D, research development intensive economy. This is the ambition. And in many ways, this tech giant does represent that dream. But fundamentally, if you're looking at these tech companies, whether it's Alibaba or Tencent or JD.com, and companies that are hot on NASDAQ, what you're seeing is in terms of the international revenue, they're tiny in comparison to domestic revenue. So here's the thing. What we have seen in the past, not just China, but Japan and South Korea, these countries, when they try to develop the industrial base, they encourage these companies to go abroad. And somehow, if you judge by that yardstick, these tech giants in China, in fact, have failed or disappoint the Beijing government in terms of revenue abroad international businesses. So I think there is this combination between disappointment as well as systemic risk that these regulators are now given a green light to step up and rein in these tech companies.
Now, we have to talk about what's happening with Jack Ma, who hasn't appeared in public for the last several weeks. He didn't appear at the taping of his own television show. He's basically vanished from public view since the cancellation of Ant's IPO, which coincided with a speech he gave being quite critical of the lack of economic reform in China. What do you make of this, given that he is perhaps the most famous entrepreneur and tech figure coming out of China?
Well, in China, we have this old saying, proverb that friends of mine would tell me, when the tree getting too big, it attracts wind. And certainly Jack Ma, by his behavior, is definitely an outlier. He's extremely charismatic. An employee really take on his mission in driving growth for the organization. And I think what will happen, time will tell whether this incident is going to send a deep seismic shift in terms of the entrepreneurial activity in China. But no doubt what this is a signaling that in China, there's nothing is too big to fail. And if organizations, their agenda are not aligned with the national agenda, then their competitive advantage would get eroded right away. I mean, the sort of phenomena we're seeing, there's a mirror in Europe or in US as well, that regulators are stepping up. But for sure, in China, the development we see of a magnitude we don't see elsewhere.
It is absolutely fascinating. What do you think the impact of all of this will be on Ant Financial itself? It was supposed to be one of the biggest IPOs ever. Will that IPO happen? Will this impact the future of Alibaba?
Yeah, so at IMD Business School, we always track the development of financial sector. How does fintech disruption is going to change the way people bank and how does businesses work? And if you take on the Alibaba playbook at the very core is this idea of taking data advantage. The fact that they can expand so quickly across all these fintech related sector is not just because their bankers are more smarter than others. In fact, everything is on algorithm. but everything is done based on data. They have your purchase behavior, they have your online search behavior, all these aggregate to give them a competitive, parallel, unparalleled advantage. What we're seeing is society in China, regulator, are not happy about that advantage. In the US or Western Europe, it's about the likability of this tech company sinking so low, people having an adverse reaction. So I think the implication for fintech is for innovation to take hold going forward. Not only that innovation needs to be great, the product needs to be great, but the organization in Western Europe would be the likability is high. In China, perhaps it needs to be completely comply with the regulator in terms of rules of the game. So I think executive needs to think broader in terms of the regulatory regime as well as the reputation of their organization.
So, what happens to China US relations after Joe Biden takes office, given that clearly the delisting of some of these Chinese companies in the United States is tied to an executive order from President Trump? Does Biden continue this more aggressive policy, or does he pull back?
Well, I think whether it's tech war or economic rivalry is simply going to get intensified going forward. Because if you're thinking about these tech companies in China, if they were to survive, the only way is to grow internationally, to bring in foreign monies back to China as a way to demonstrate their value add to the government. If that's the case, which means that the international competition, whether it's in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, or Latin America, these would be the frontier market. US firms as well as Chinese company would compete even more intensely going forward. So I think the battle for global market leadership simply would get intensified as an ongoing backdrop for the new administration.